So today we celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany as we remember the story of the wise men bringing their gifts to Jesus. There are 12 days of Christmas, which begin on December 25th. They are not a countdown to Christmas. I recognize that there are many things in the world that should bother me more than this misconception, and yet it annoys me every year because I am liturgically petty. And while I'm being liturgically petty, people need to stop shoving partridges into trees, pear or otherwise. Partridges are a ground-nesting bird, and they do not want to be in trees. Bird fact. Anyway, so now we're at Epiphany after the 12 days. So at one point in church history, Epiphany, and not Christmas, was considered to be one of the two most important days of the Christian year, the other being Easter. Because Epiphany is the time that we tell the story of Magi bringing gifts to Jesus. Some cultures have a tradition of exchanging presents in early January instead of late December. Anyway, this week I've been thinking about some of the traditions that have built up around Epiphany, which Christians have been celebrating longer than we have been celebrating Christmas. One of these traditions is to bake a special bread or cake. Later this morning, we will be sharing I hope nobody here speaks German, dry Königskuchen. Cool. Glad my mom's not here. Literally Three Kings cake, which is a sweet yeasted bread from Switzerland. There is a French version, galette des rois, which is filled with a sweet almond paste. There is a Greek version, vasilopita, with some spices I'd never heard of and didn't really want to track down. Other versions feature icing, sprinkles, brandy, custard fillings, and other things that looked tasty but seemed difficult to share as communion for obvious reasons. There are English and Scottish versions with a whole bunch of dried fruit. Technically, a traditional dry Königskuchen would be studded with raisins, but because raisins are gross, in my opinion, and a blogger said it was a more modern option in Switzerland, I baked mine with chocolate chips. I think it's what Jesus would want. Of course, because Epiphany is not quite the huge celebration that it has been in the past, because Christmas is usually considered bigger today, some of these breads have become more associated with New Year's celebrations than Epiphany itself. But my point is that throughout time and cultures and cuisines, we have seen Epiphany as something worth celebrating. The story of strangers from far-off distant lands bringing offerings that were significant to them is a story that speaks to us and makes us ask what we might bring, were we able to bring a gift to a young Jesus. Instead, at Epiphany and at Christmas, we choose to give gifts to each other, bringing our various experiences and resources and traditions and flavors to our shared tables. There is a lot to be celebrated in the Christmas season, besides the whole, Jesus being born thing, which is probably the biggest thing. But in addition to that, I really love that at this time of year, we bring together traditions from across cultures. Jesus came to save the world, and the whole world comes together to celebrate. We've picked up a few things on our travels across history and geography. Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from the book of Matthew, chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. Hear now the word of the Lord. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah would be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word." so that I may also go pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So consider this your annual reminder. Nowhere in the Bible do we read that there were 3 wise men, just that there were 3 gifts. I like to imagine that there was a traveling band of maybe like 9 wise travelers, and 8 of them brought gold because that seemed like a good and useful thing to offer to a new king and his parents. But the 9th wise man brought a chest of frankincense and myrrh because he had no idea what babies liked, and he couldn't find Mary's baby registry online. So then they all got there, and 8 of his buddies opened up their treasure chest to show their gifts of gold. And it's only at that moment that the 9th wise man stops to think, "No, this is kind of awkward. I don't know what a baby's going to do with this." Frankincense and myrrh have actually been used in some traditional medicines as painkillers, and modern studies suggest that they may have antimicrobial properties. So it's entirely possible that Mary did legitimately appreciate the frankincense and myrrh for practical purposes and not just their symbolism. I kind of like my headcanon though, because that's as awkward as I would probably feel at a baby shower. I've never actually been to one, at least not in person. Anyway. It must have been a very strange party when a Jewish couple and their child were joined by an unspecified number of scholars from the East. Even after everything else they had been through, I can't imagine that Mary and Joseph would have been expecting such guests. I wonder how well they could communicate with each other. I wonder who was the most surprised. Mary and Joseph, Jewish peasants being honored by scholars from an entirely different culture and faith, or the wise men, expecting to find a king who might become their new patron, but finding only a family of Jewish peasants? Still, by the end of their time together, the 2 groups clearly had an impact on each other. The wise men see that their worldview has been turned upside down, finding a peasant child, but still offering him gifts originally intended for a very different kind of king. The family sees that Jesus has already made an impact not just within their own community or culture or faith, but as far as the land that the wise men have traveled from. Word of Jesus is already spreading. We might be inclined to end this chapter of the story as the wise men turn towards home, traveling by a different road. But both groups leave Bethlehem. The wise men headed east, and the family headed south. I'm sure that anyone who has done any traveling at all has come home with stories of people and places that have made an impact on them. In 2009, I came within a few yards of both Queen Elizabeth II and Pope Benedict XVI in Oxford and Rome, respectively. We didn't exactly have any kind of conversation because why on earth would a major world leader have a conversation with a random American college student? But I was actually formally introduced to His Holiness, the late Pope Emeritus. They were both complicated figures, and I would struggle to put into words exactly why either of them held such significance to me personally. And they were both rather elderly and in increasingly poor health, but still the Queen and the Pope made an impact on me. and I have grieved them both after Her Majesty died in September and His Holiness died this month. We find people, unexpected people, throughout our lives and travels. And sometimes those people change our lives, whether we spend a moment with them or a weekend or a semester or a career or a marriage. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus and the group of wise men found each other. Their time together probably wasn't all that long, but it was significant enough in the life of Jesus that this story made it into one of the Gospels, even though each Gospel leaves out literal decades of his life and countless miracles and sermons. They found each other, but they chose the paths that led them together. God chose to be born to Mary. Joseph chose to stay with Mary. Mary chose to commit her life to a strange child who was never quite fully hers and who she could never quite really understand. None of us can, but we try anyway. The wise men chose to travel many miles to find a newborn king. And even though they weren't expecting the plot twist that they found in Bethlehem, they chose to share their extravagant gifts with this new family. As each group begins the long journey after their meeting, leaving Bethlehem, falling off of Herod's radar, they must have met many other people and chosen to trust them and chosen to accept their help and support. Mary and Joseph raised their firstborn son in Egypt, away from their families of origin, away from the temple in Jerusalem, maybe away from a community that spoke their native language well. It's hard enough to move across the country in the 21st century. I shudder to think just how monumental it would have been to leave behind everyone and everything they knew to move to Egypt. Families of origin, the people you share close DNA with, biological parents and siblings, etc., can be important sources of support, community, and moral lessons. If that has been true in your life, I hope you know what a blessing that is. But we also have families of choice. Friends, colleagues, teachers, mentors, neighbors, church people, romantic partners, teammates, members of a military unit or fraternal organization or a specialized field. We choose to be brave enough to be vulnerable around these people, because to love someone is to accept that in any kind of relationship, there will be conflict and disappointment and loss. To love someone is to trust that the joy and support and companionship will be worth the pain that will inevitably come alongside. The wise men could have done what Herod asked and told the tyrant where to find Jesus. They might have become very wealthy men if they had made that choice. But instead, they chose to pledge their loyalty to Jesus, not Herod. No matter what kind of family we are originally born into, we crave other relationships. Perhaps it is buried deep within the human condition because we know that we can't make it alone, but also because we know that there is another relationship our souls long for, a relationship with our Creator. And so we choose to step outside of our comfort zones and go on long journeys and come to know strangers, even if they seem at first to be very, very unlike ourselves. We choose to claim our own families, our own people who will be significant to us. It's why I packed up my life 5 years ago and chose to move 1,000 miles to Michigan. It's why the wise men left their homes to go in search of a king. It's why Mary and Joseph took their son to a country where he might be able to grow up in safety. It's why we keep coming back to church from generation to generation, because we're looking for the threads of connection that might lead us to God. From generation to generation, we keep seeking. And from generation to generation, we will keep seeking, because we are following a star, and we believe that its light will shine on something new. We will keep seeking, because we know that when we find Jesus, we will drop everything and offer what we have.